Welcome back to all of our viewers in our stream. Good to have you with us. We have reached our final element before we wrap up this conference, and it's a special element. We've talked at great length about the need to future-proof German industry, the need for more sustainability, the need for making sure that there's the right political framework for innovation. But none of that can happen, of course, without partners and cooperation. So we have a special transatlantic business talk for you now. I'm very happy to welcome Mr. Siegfried Russwurm, who is here in the studio with me. He's the president of the Federation of German Industries, the BDI, and also very happy to welcome Jay Timmons. He is the president and CEO of the National Association of Manufacturers. So a warm welcome to you both. And Mr. Timmons, thank you for the early start, for making an early start for us this morning. We're very happy to have you with us. And, you know, we're here speaking to you from Germany, which you know is really a powerhouse of manufacturing and of industry. And we've been talking about that here over the last 3 days. So I'd love to start, Mr. Timmons, with asking you to give us a lay of the land, this made in the U.S. label. How does manufacturing look right now in the U.S.?
Well, guten Tag. That is the extent of my German, so you'll have to bear with me, unfortunately. And yes, we are starting our day here in the United States, and it sounds like you're starting to finish yours. But look, manufacturers in the United States are really optimistic, and they're growing stronger every day. We're proud of the fact, quite frankly, that it was our industry that kept working throughout the pandemic. Manufacturers were declared essential in most parts of the United States, and they worked hard to implement safety measures to allow employees to show up and keep producing the household goods and technology that Americans depend on for daily life. But I think it's pretty safe to say that manufacturers really went above and beyond during the pandemic. We ramped up and we shifted operations to help produce personal protective equipment, like masks and gloves and medical supplies, including ventilators, when demand was just skyrocketing for those life-saving devices and goods. And I think that work and that resilience really set the stage for where we are today. We're emerging stronger, and it seems almost counterintuitive that we're emerging stronger than we were before the pandemic. And in fact, 88% of manufacturers here in the United States have reported a positive outlook for the first quarter. And we think we're going to even see higher numbers in the second quarter. The good news, I think, is the American people have developed even stronger confidence and trust in manufacturing. And manufacturers are really helping to lead the United States into this new post-pandemic world through the production and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines. They're creating jobs, they're innovating, and they're keeping vital supply chains open, which of course is one of our biggest challenges. And speaking of challenges, we do have headwinds. The costs of inputs and materials have been rising steadily in recent months. That's not a phenomenon that is unique to the United States. That's a worldwide issue. And a lot of that has to do with supply chain disruptions, internationally. Extreme weather, other impediments, port closures or blockages. They've exposed all kinds of vulnerabilities for our supply chain. Now, the NAM is directing much of our advocacy towards strengthening supply chains within the United States, as I know you, of course, are doing in Germany as well as globally to help prevent shortages and stem the rising costs of inputs. But I think our industry has truly shown, especially over the last 15 to 18 months, that we can solve any problem, and that manufacturing was made for this challenge and, frankly, the next.
That is a really good sign. And you brought up some important points, including supply chains. We're going to get to that in a moment. Just a quick follow-up question on the political framework, which I mentioned. We went from America First to Buy American. So if you had to give the Biden administration a report card from the perspective of manufacturers, what would you say so far?
So I think this is an important message that I'm frankly honored to deliver. The alliance between our European friends and allies and the United States is strong, it's vital, it's important, and it needs to be strengthened even further. I'm very pleased that the president has communicated that alliance and our commitment to that alliance, because the American people are committed to it. There may have been some messengers from the United States that perhaps had not communicated that effectively or appropriately over the course of the last 4 years. But quite frankly, manufacturers are very pleased that there is a redoubling of that commitment with the European Union and other allies around the world. I think, look, we all believe in and we all support and we're all inspired by the resiliency and the strength of manufacturing in our own countries. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing. But we can't ignore the fact that we are interconnected globally and that we must rely on each other, especially allies have to rely on each other to not only promote our economies, but to promote our shared values of freedom, of democracy, and opportunity around the world. So I'm glad to see that commitment once again outlined by our government.
Mr. Russwurm, I'd like to get your take on this. I mean, these are two sides of the coin, of course, promoting domestic manufacturing, but also ensuring that you don't erect protectionist barriers. So what's your take so far on what we've seen from the Biden administration on trade policy and manufacturing?
Well, I can only concur with Jay. There are very clear signals from the new administration in the US that there are strong ties across the Atlantic. And we as manufacturers, as enterprises, we see these ties every day. There is trade across the Atlantic in trillions every year. There is a myriad of companies that have their perceived headquarters on the one side and a lot of manufacturing on the other side of the Atlantic in both directions. So the ties are strong. We have got the message. We've got the message from the new administration. And as John Kerry nicely phrased it in the B20, he said, well, you know, the United States were never away. It's not that America is back. The White House is back. America was never away. That was a very strong statement to that. For sure, we have been frowning when we heard this Buy American. And Jay, to be quite frank, Buy from France would be a slogan which we would prefer. But we know that this is based on friendship. So we will be vigilant, for sure, to be quite frank, because if there are any tightening rules, but we trust in this partnership across the Atlantic.
I should say, by the way, hello to Siegfried, because we are thousands of miles away, but technology manufacturers have made this possible, so it's good to see you.
Yeah, well, and manufacturers understand each other across the Atlantic. By the way, nice patch. I like that.
You understand each other?
Also make Germany too.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I see. Yeah, that is a great symbol that you have there. And you understand each other, of course, but it is also all about trade and how you work together. So, Mr. Timmons, I'd like to ask you, do we need to see an overhaul of trade policy? For example, a new TTIP? I mean, what is your approach on how countries need to work together?
Well, look, I think manufacturers in the United States would welcome a new dialogue that's aimed at securing an agreement like the proposed Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. And we haven't heard a lot about that lately, obviously, but I think that those talks can and should re-engage. There's a lot that's changed since the last go-around, so there would be a lot to revisit. Manufacturers really see it as vital that the administration pursue these types of free trade agreements. We were very excited, and we supported the confirmation of Ambassador Catherine Tai to be our United States trade representative. And we've been working with the administration to address a number of priority issues for the industry, like the transatlantic relationship. One of the administration's crucial responsibilities is going to be to work toward these new trade agreements and to get rid of unfair trade barriers and to propel manufacturing innovation around the world. To make it possible, though, we have this kind of strange little system here in the United States sometimes. But the President of the United States, whoever he or she is, has to be given by Congress, has to be delegated authority to negotiate these trade agreements. It's called Trade Promotion Authority here in the United States. That is set to expire just in 8 days. And that's going to leave the administration without the tools they need. So we need Congress to reauthorize Trade Promotion Authority so that the president and the administration are free to negotiate agreements without major procedural hurdles. So we're looking forward to working on that from the National Association of Manufacturers perspective to help set the stage for a new round or a new TTIP.
Okay, so there are some hurdles there, but there are opportunities certainly to open the door. Mr. Russwurm, I'd like to ask you in that vein, how could Europe, or how does Europe maybe need to become more American and vice versa when we talk about manufacturing and trade policy?
Well, first, let me give you a short comment from my point of view on TTIP. Most likely, we need to slice the elephant. You know, a big comprehensive agreement, as TTIP was initially planned, there have been a lot of emotions around that. Pragmatically, as we manufacturers typically are, let's slice the elephant and see which element of such an agreement can we fix now? Can our government fix now and march on and take it step by step? I've been working with American partners, with American friends for many years. There are some aspects I would wish that more Europeans have this can-do approach of many of my American friends. You know, we start that, we tackle that, and we see where the obstacles are, and we overcome them when they look up. Whereas the European or maybe German tendency is, let's make a plan, let's make a precise plan, let's make an extremely precise plan with all ifs and whens, and that is slow and takes time. So taking a little bit from that approach would definitely be helpful. On the other hand, the rather small economies in Europe, and our potential is big for the European market, our reality sometimes is in slices. We know how important multilateralism is. And every now and then I met CEOs in the States, Jay, where I felt, well, our domestic market is big enough. Why worry about going global? We have a big domestic market. And the argument is a strong one. The United States is a big domestic market, sure, but the globe is even bigger, and the community of friends is even bigger. So I hope that this word spreads out. Yes, we are proud Americans, but there is a world out there that is even bigger than our proud country.
It should give you comfort, Siegfried, that I don't know too many that actually have that philosophy. We are well aware that 95% of the world's customers live outside of the United States. So, and again, it's not just about commerce. And I think that's such an important, message that I think is now being reinforced by President Biden. It's also about our shared values and our shared commitment and love for democracy and freedom. And so I hope that we can continue to focus not only on our alliances and our friendships and what we can do to help elevate the standard of living in countries all around the world, but also focus on how that helps us propel those values around the world. I think, Siegfried, you and I should just sit down and negotiate this thing and just cut the government out of it. I think we could probably come up with a solution. What do you think?
I just wanted to say that. The interesting pattern is that while government negotiations live in their boundary conditions, as you said, for Congress and the presidency, we have similar setups here and certain responsibilities in the European Union, others here in Germany on different levels of our federal system. Pragmatic as we are, most likely we would ease out some of these things. And actually, companies do that.
Sure.
Yes. With all the obstacles and complications of some rules, to a large extent, companies find pragmatic approaches. That comes to certain limits. One of the limits that we need to overcome from a regulatory perspective, from a governmental perspective, is the digital collaboration, where we have currently, unfortunately, a situation that since the abandoned Privacy Shield agreement, there is a gap which, with all our creativity, Jay, we will stumble to overcome that. And here we need to motivate our governments to find a way to open up that dimension, because the world is going digital. Manufacturing is digital, by all means. So we need to address that digital challenge between our governments, actually.
So there's
yes,
a lot of...
and of course, cybersecurity will be a key factor in that as well.
Absolutely.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Timmons. I just wanted to come back to a point that you made about shared values, because there's been one of the big topics of discussion, really a part of this conference, has been how to engage with China. So I'd be curious to hear how you and the perspective from the U.S. manufacturing and look at German engagement in China.
Well, look, we recognize that all the logistical and strategic considerations that multi-corporations have to make. And many of our members, as you might guess, are actually based in Germany, or they have extensive operations in your country, which is why, quite honestly, the NAM and the BDI have had such a strong partnership and a strong relationship for so many years. And I'm so proud to continue to share that bond. So our members at the NAM, they also see value in continued engagement with China. It's a major destination for U.S. exports. I think we have around $90 billion in manufactured goods going there last year. They're a third largest trading partner. So they're going to remain an important market for manufacturers in America. And so for American manufacturers to be globally competitive, they know they have to be able to compete in China and around the world. So we can't be naive, however. We have to plot the future of our economic involvement with China. We've got to find ways to boost manufacturing competitiveness while, frankly, kind of pushing back. And I think it's important to do that. And I think the president laid it out very, very well earlier this month. We've got to push back against clearly problematic Chinese behaviors. We know China is an economic security threat, and that's a matter of competition. But it's becoming more and more clear that China is also a national security threat for democracies around the world. So again, the president's recent trip to Europe, we were really encouraged. And our hope is that this visit, subsequent efforts will strengthen our shared commitment to democracy and freedom so we can work together to address those shared challenges, but also the shared threats. And those threats have to, as we look at them, we have to understand that they include market distorting behavior, intellectual property theft, and that just shouldn't be accepted as a cost of doing business in China. China has to live up to the promises that it made as part of its WTO Ascension Agreement 2 decades ago. We've also got to find ways to stop human rights violations, particularly forced labor, and address, as I mentioned, some of those national security issues like hacking and cybersecurity. And even as we work with China and try to foster reform, the EU and the US need to work together toward trade agreements that allow us to diversify our supply chains, and that will also help us address human rights and labor concerns.
Absolutely. I can only concur. We all want to do business with China. Why should we not? And we are perfectly transparent. We have raised our concerns. We have articulated our preconditions. There are certain aspects where we are different, and we can accept that to be different. And there are certain red lines where this doesn't work out. And human rights, with all respect, they are not an internal affair for no country around the globe. And here is where we will have a strong stand. And again, it's good to have partners and allies that share the same values and come to the same conclusions.
Absolutely. And Mr. Timmons, a question on supply chains. And if we think about supply chains as critical infrastructure, how do you expect supply chain management to shift in the U.S. in coming years?
That is something that we have been dealing with, it's pretty safe to say that we've been dealing with that for a number of years here in the United States, but it became very evident during the pandemic that we did have a supply chain crisis here. We were woefully unprepared in terms of the production of basic needs like masks and surgical gloves and robes and hospital booties and other PPE, because largely those products were produced outside of the United States. We presented a plan to the previous administration. We've been working with the Biden administration to figure out ways to incentivize manufacturers to invest their next dollar here in the United States to help us kind of deal with some of the supply chain issues. We've also got issues that we know we have to deal with in a more immediate sense. So the semiconductor shortage here in the United States is causing us some major problems. So we have some legislation that's going through Congress to help us address those issues. But it really, for us, and I'm sure for manufacturers everywhere, it's all about incentives. where can we invest that next dollar to get the most bang for the buck, as we would say here in the United States, hire the next worker, and for major concerns like the pandemic, you obviously want to have a strong and resilient supply chain in your own country. Domestic supply is critical.
You want to weigh in on that, Mr.
Well,
Yeah.
the key word that Jay mentioned was resilience. That will be a stronger criterion in optimizing supply chains and supply networks. The risk of putting too much eggs into one basket, we have seen the consequences. That closure of one channel in Suez, that closure of one port in China causes major disruptions around the world. And risk management in supply networks will be a much looked for profession over the next time. To what extent it will be a reshoring may depend on the size of your country, and what is reshoring for the United States may be a different distribution of sources for the smaller countries like in Europe. But definitely this tendency for the sake of scale and cost benefits of scale to put all eggs into one basket, literally, we've seen the consequences. So getting your supply chain and your network on a broader basis, that's like an insurance premium that you pay. And every now and then you need to look at some damage to justify that you pay that premium. We've seen the damage now, and I guess companies are more willing to accept that premium to optimize their supply networks, ideally not for the cost of higher prices to pay, but have less risks on one single point to make that thing collapse, as we have seen it now.
Important lessons learned. We're pretty much out of time, so I'm going to ask really one last very short question, literally a lightning round question here. Starting with you, Mr. Russwurm, what is the biggest priority for industry and manufacturers to aid economic recovery going forward this year and the coming years?
Well, it is about competitiveness. And we know that there are competitors all around the globe. A lot of people are eager to reach our standard of living, our success that is based on manufacturing. So the race about competitiveness will go on. And in such a race, partners are good to have, Jay. That's what I see.
And Mr. Timmons, what's your take?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So here in the United States, the NAM works on our domestic competitiveness, and we focus on tax policy, regulatory policy. We're very focused right now on infrastructure investment here in the United States. That's been neglected here for too long. And then, of course, strong and vibrant trade relationships. So I feel very optimistic that we're going to get there and continue to improve here in the United States. And I'm also very optimistic and bullish that our relationships around the world are going to strengthen as well.
That's a very positive note to close on, so we'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Timmons and Mr. Russwurm. I think we need to let you guys go offline and do some negotiating now from what I could take away from this conversation, but thank you both. And to our viewers in the stream, we'll be wrapping up the conference in just a few moments, so please do stay with us. We'll be right back.